What we are engaged in is not just the work of academics, researchers and educationalists. This is actually a political battle. We're living at a time of change in many regards. And one of significant change is the recognition that children have rights. Since 1989, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child has created something quite new in the world. And in the intervening years between then and now, we're seeing that more and more countries are beginning to see the seriousness of taking children seriously. So human rights are not God-given. They don't appear out of nature. They're something we and our ancestors have struggled for in very different histories in different countries. But nevertheless, there has been that battle for millennia for the rights we now enjoy and accept as citizens of the 21st century. But we also have to work for the rights for our children. And one of their rights is an education that fits their needs. Not an education that fits the needs of society, to turn them into what we want them to be, in a certain pattern, but fits their needs, so they too can unfold and live in the modern world as fulfilled adults, and that their well-being stands central to our intentions and work. That's a high ideal, and in many aspects we fail. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to struggle, both on a family level, a school level, community level, and an international political level as well. So the documents we're looking at today are not just shared among educationalists. They go to Brussels. They go to politicians, and we ask them to look at it and rethink the policies within which we have to work as educators. It's just that they make sure that the quality we provide is what the children deserve. But on the other hand, they have to listen to us as educationalists to look at the content and the methodology and the environment and the manner in which that is created and built up. Jan Fiegel was the recent Commissioner for Education in Europe until the last elections. He was quite a remarkable commissioner, very insightful, came from Slovakia. And in a speech he gave a little while ago, and I think this was influenced by Sir Ken Robinson, which has been mentioned, he said this: "The major future challenges in the education field are how to reform our learning systems to prepare our young people for jobs that do not exist yet, using technologies that have not been invented, in order to solve problems that haven't even been identified yet." So if that's our task as educators, how can we claim to know the children's future? How can we say that this is an education which will prepare you for that very unknown world? And we've seen it in our own lifetimes. Tumultuous changes, both historically, politically, technologically, in communications, in travel, in just enabling us as an international group to come together. This is a new time in human experience. And we have to balance this technology of ours with our well-being, our inner health, both physiologically and psychologically in the child, and help them find their balance. And if we just look at the technology for a moment, when Newton was young, he could play with the technology of his time. He liked clocks, watches, and windmills. He could take them apart and understand them. As a child, he played with them, and that led then, in some way, to his future career as a great scientist. Einstein, his father had an electric motor factory. And Einstein he was fascinated by these electric motors. And he could take them apart and put them together again, and he could see how they worked. What about our children today? Have you ever tried taking your iPhone apart to see how it works? Could you put it back together again? And would you be any wiser if you did so? It's a new time. We can't really understand in the same way the technology we use. We can't take a steam engine. You could even 50 years ago. Take even a telephone, perhaps, or radio. You could take it apart, if you're gifted enough, you could put it back together again, and you would understand the principles on which it worked. We can't. So we have a technology which is wonderful. It brings us together as a world community as never before. We can see the world come towards us daily in our houses. It arrives in our phones, in our pockets. Yes, we've got it in our pockets. The world is in our pockets. It's a new time. But how do we help our children cope with that? They have to deal with it. And there'll be new technologies in a few years that we don't imagine. So what we have to give our children is something beyond just knowledge and just information, well, just beyond information. It's interesting, it's called information technology, because the transition has to go from information to knowledge to understanding to wisdom. And that's the process we have to help our young people and children find in themselves, how to make that bridge. So what we learn and what we do has an ethical dimension in wisdom. The transition, information, information, knowledge, understanding, wisdom. And to do that, it's more than just thinking about it. It actually needs that element of practicality, of doing. And in the social emotional education realm which we're working in, we're finding the role of the arts is essential, and hence creativity there. And it's not just creativity with a new idea. It's a creativity that involves the whole human being, the whole child, in creating something that goes beyond the Descartes model of human beings that we now see is deficient in some regards. Beyond that, to encapsulate everything we can do. And as I said earlier, this comes very much from experience. And again, that's why I like Václav Havel. Here was a man who stood against society. He felt the politics of his community in the Czech Republic, the oppression, the absolutism of communism, the corruption, the secret police was wrong. And he was willing as a playwright to say it creatively on the stage with his plays. And he suffered for it. He went to prison. He went to solitary confinement. And what happened there? He felt guilty. He felt in himself his failings, his weaknesses, where he'd gone wrong. He was right to stand and not submit to that behavior, that treatment, but nevertheless in him he felt wrong. And therefore that experience of his failure then led him on to what he could achieve. And he became president of the Czech Republic after the Velvet Revolution. And I'd like to think that in education we're also having a time of revolution, a time of change. Responsible revolution, like responsible education. But nevertheless, what we're experiencing here is experienced in many theatres around the world, many educational contexts. Teachers, politicians, even ministers are saying, well, we haven't got it quite right. We'll have a new reform law. Oh dear, that's not quite right. Oh, we'll have another reform law. Oh dear, that doesn't work either. We'll have another reform law. In England, there's been 9 major parliamentary laws on education in 8 years. And the teachers just don't know where they are. It just comes and it goes, it comes and it goes. But the purpose is good. It's saying we need to serve our children better. But how? We're here because we think this other aspect of the human, the social and emotional, has to be there to balance the academic and the technical side. We need to work with our feelings, our social life, the intercourse and the communication we have with each other. And that's a child's right to experience and learn how to do it, get those competencies, go through their failings and successes with support and care in their schooling. Howard Gardner was mentioned this morning. Now, Howard Gardner has worked a lot on this. He's not only on multiple intelligences, he also worked on what made people good people. What made people want to do good in the world? And his conclusion was, it's our vision of what the future could be. That we're not completely controlled by our past and our culture. We're not completely controlled by our genes, our genetic makeup. They influence us, of course. But how we see the future has a huge impact on our development and on the child's, because they are the future. And he came to a conclusion that's quite remarkable in his book, The Disciplined Mind. It does not suffice simply to hope that students admire and seek to embody virtues like truthfulness and goodness and beauty. We must relate those to one another when possible. He came to the conclusion the real curriculum of a school is truth, beauty, and goodness. And this is an absolute pragmatic, scientifically based view of the world. And it becomes an ideal. And struggling for that is really the essential, what we want our children to be able to live in and live with, and what we want to bring to our children. Recognizing our failures, our frailties, our mistakes, of course. But that goal is what he sets at the end of his long, long work, and the great changes he's brought to our consciousness about our own fields of intelligence. And if we look at the world, what do we see? There is a change, whether you call it the Arab Spring, the Indignados in Madrid. There's something among the young people of today saying, something is wrong. And I think that is an implication on their education. In Chile, the students have taken over the schools. There are 300 schools run by students. University students have gone into the schools and decided what the teachers was doing was wrong, and they want to change it. So we can see this ferment of young people in different ways around the world. Yes? We've heard of, yesterday we heard of other countries. We heard of Vancouver. You mentioned this. Yeah? This uprising, it's a nice word, uprising. This uprising of something is wrong. And a lot of it goes back to how we were educated. Our childhood, this feel of what Howard Gardner calls dis-ease. Not disease, dis-ease. We feel uneasy, and our young people do, that they're not met. And in a world of high unemployment, which, like many European countries, you suffer from here, in a world with a takeover in a way of technology that we seem not to be able to control, in a world of financial storms, tempests that sweep across completely out of control and have such deep impact on our daily lives, of course there's a feeling of unease. So how do we help children deal with that? And that's bringing the whole human being into the classroom. Not a part, not a parcel of the human being, not the head, but saying there's an integrity to being human. And feelings and our relationships to each other are part of that. And through the arts and music and drama and theatre and dance and poetry, those are forms of research. Just as our writings here in the book are research on one level, so is movement research. That's how a child researches the world, as you'll hear later from David. Children play, they move, they dance, they sing, they skip, they don't sit still, because they're researching. That movement is a research into what it means to have a body. And how the kinetic energy, the kinetic intelligence is then developed. So there are many forms where we can learn from children. And as Havel, I'll come back to him because I've spoken about him before, said, it's as though the world has simply become too much for us to deal with. The main task for the coming time is something else, a radical renewal of our sense of responsibility. A radical renewal of our sense of responsibility. That what the future generations will experience lies a lot on how we approach education and childhood today. And if we look around the world, the increase of depression has been mentioned. There's a huge increase in obesity, even in countries that have traditionally a good diet. Nevertheless, obesity is growing. The effects allergies. Increase in allergies is expanding. Children finding it difficult to feel in harmony, physical harmony with the environment in which they live. Nervous dispositions, behavioural disorders. 20%, it's calculated in many European countries, 20% of children have some sort of mental problems. So it's a growing unease. And if we don't change our education, if we don't change the way we approach children, then it's not going to get any better. So I'd just like to conclude with that statement there, which I've just made, and just say that the one other aspect that hasn't been mentioned so far is imagination. And it's in that world of imagination that we can begin to foresee and develop a future. And the beauty of imagination is that it can be all-encompassing, have a lot of metamorphosis, and can change. And that's why we've brought together social emotional education and creativity. It's imagination that links the two. So thank you.